Happy Tuesday and welcome to this week's Leia on the Line Tap In Tuesdays. It is actually Wednesday today, and I'm going to tell you why I wasn't able to upload on Tuesday as I normally have been for the last 6 weeks. The reason is because I had a film, my thesis film at NYU, which screened in a festival in Paris, France. So I actually was able to travel to Paris to see the film Boneless 180 screened in Paris. And it was an amazing experience. There was a lot of shorts that played along with mine in the festival. And my film was made in Detroit, Michigan, and it centered 2 female skateboarders from Detroit. So it was really cool to see the film there. I think in Paris they pronounce Detroit Detroit, I think. So that was kind of funny. They're like, Detroit Detroit? I don't know. I'm not French, so it was my first time in France. It was pretty cool being there and seeing everything that they had, and I was like, oh yeah, I've kind of heard of some of those things before. I like the NYU arch that they have in Washington Square Park. Like, we went to that in Paris. There was a lot of stuff that we did, that we saw, so it was a really amazing experience to see my film played in another country, and especially to see how an international audience kind of took to the film and things that they resonated with, and they really enjoyed it, which I was nervous about, but glad to hear that, or glad to realize that it was going well around me. So yeah, it was a great experience. So now we're back into Tap In Tuesdays, where I've just been over the past 6 weeks kind of just updating with news that's happened specifically in the WNBA, a little bit of women's college basketball. But I think this Tap In Tuesdays has primarily been about the WNBA. And I'm just going to fill you in on some stuff so you don't have to go do the research yourself, which you actually should do the research yourself also, but I'm just going to kind of recap some stuff with my own personal opinion. So let's jump right into it. Today we're going to talk about the new CBA agreement that the WNBA has proposed. So they've proposed a lot. So there's like 4 main things we're going to talk about here. So the first one is they've proposed a new minimum salary for top earning players of just over $1 million. So right now, the maximum salary for top earning players is $252, and the minimum earning salary for top players is $220,000. So we're jumping over a 4 times increase, pushing it past $1 million for these top earning players. So just right off the bat, that's incredible. Okay, that's a huge jump. The second thing that they've introduced is they're increasing the revenue share, the percentage that players get on top of this. Right now, it's 9.2%, I want to say. Yes, 9.3%. And they're increasing that from 10 to 14%. The amount hasn't been disclosed. We don't actually have numbers on how much this actually is because the numbers of revenue for the WNBA haven't exactly been publicly disclosed. So we don't have exact numbers on this. We just have these percents, which aren't actually fully accurate yet. And again, this is all proposed for what could potentially happen in the future. So there's those 2 increases that have happened. They've also proposed increasing the salary cap in the WNBA to $5 million. And the future caps would then be tied to revenue growth rather than a fixed annual increase. So that's also been increased as well. Again, this is all being proposed by the WNBA, and the WNBPA, who's made up of NECA as the president, Brianna Stewart, Nafisa Collier, and a few others, are working to represent the players on this and negotiating to create this CBA agreement, which will define what the WNBA players will receive for the next 5+ years in this negotiation. They last for a little over 5 years, 7 years, until it ends or until someone breaks the agreement and says we want a new one, which happened in 2024. So now in 2025, this is why we are renegotiating. The WNBA players are renegotiating. They called for this, whereas the initial agreement made in 2020 was supposed to expire in 2027. So that's what's happening there. But there's always a caveat. So the caveat to these increases in numbers as it looks good on the outside, you know, they're increasing pay, there's been pushback. And the WNBPA has pushed back legitimately for a few reasons. Their first concern is with the revenue share. It has increased from 9.3%, and it will go up to maximum 14%, which is an increase, but their concern is that the league's proposal doesn't feature a system which the salary cap and thus these players' salaries sufficiently grow with the business, compared to a more robust revenue-based model like the NBA, which is 50%. So in the NBA, the players are getting 50% of what the league generates as revenue. And in the WNBA, there's the fixed salary cap plus this 9.3%, which is now going to be potentially 10 to 14%. So that is still a fixed number, the percent, even though the percent is a percentage, so it will change as revenue changes. It is still a fixed percent. So what they've been asking for is a revenue share that increases as the league and the revenue also increases. So that's something important to note here. The union wants a scalable model, meaning if the league revenue grows, their share should grow proportionally. So, for example, players argue that if revenue jumps 18%, say, from one time period to the next, say in a few months, we've grown in 18% revenue. I'm just making these numbers up. They're arguing that in that amount of time, their share should also increase 18%. So that's essentially what they've been asking for in terms of the revenue share to increase along with the business. So the revenue share has increased by percentage. It has not increased alongside the growth of the WNBA. So that's a key difference to note. And some union voices in the WNBA have characterized the league's offer as essentially a, quote, fixed salary floor. So that's the $500,000, just to note, the increase of the maximum player salary to a minimum of $1 million, just over $1 million, would make the new average salary in the WNBA around $500,000. So we now have a fixed salary floor, which is going to average $500,000 plus a modest revenue share. So those two things combined would be the totality of WNBA player salaries. So they're arguing that this undervalues players, and these are some comments that union leadership has made in the past few weeks. So given that, those are kind of based on revenue and salaries and things, those types of things that have been proposed in the new potential CBA agreement. But there are two big caveats to this proposal in the new CBA, which are almost just as important to kind of talk about, because they're things that the WNBA is proposing which don't really make sense. The two things are they want to start the season earlier, so increase the number of games. So it's kind of a trade-off. Okay, we're going to pay you more, we're going to do this, well, play more games. And the other thing is they want to get rid of no team housing. So we're going to dive into the no team housing later. But first, let's talk about this earlier start to the season. So they want to start the season around mid-March. So this affects a few types of players. The first that it affects is college players. Because as we know, March Madness goes into April. I mean, the championship game for women's college basketball last year, when UConn won, was April 6th, I believe. So if you're Paige Beckers and you are going to be a number one draft pick, well, now you might have to forego the rest of your college season and forego that potential college championship so that you can make training camp for the WNBA. So it's kind of something that, again, it doesn't really make sense. Like, why would they propose that, knowing that rookies will be drafted, and then that obviously brings a ton of eyeballs to the WNBA? It doesn't really make much sense. And I think there's a few reasons for that. And I think the main thing that that I think is that it's kind of just reclaiming what the WNBA is, and they want to be seen as this powerful top league. This is the top tier league that you can play in, and anything that's outside of that, we don't care about, because this is it. I think that might be one reason for this type of a caveat to be made in the new CBA. Another type of player that this would affect is players that play overseas, because most overseas seasons end right around that time. So if you're going to move the season earlier, then players will have to come back from playing overseas earlier or not be able to play overseas. And as we know, most WNBA players play overseas because they are paid more money. So it's essentially, again, it's kind of like a power trip in a way of, you can only play in the WNBA because if you play in this other league, then you're not, and you sign for a full season, you won't be able to finish the season because we're moving the season earlier. So they're kind of playing to like a lot of politics here and things that don't necessarily make sense, but I think they know they don't make sense, and that's why they're kind of proposing it. The second thing here, which is just as bizarre, is no team housing. So just to give some history on WNBA team housing, they've had team housing since the first CBA was ratified in 1999. It's always been a thing that any player can choose to take a stipend and live in housing that is provided by the team, so you don't have to worry, about signing a lease or getting a sublet or being screwed over or anything like that, because it's all taken care of. And it's a safe location, it's done for you. So it's a more attractive thing, especially for women, going to countries overseas or going to places that they've never been before, going to expensive cities like New York, LA, San Francisco. Okay, you come and right away we've got a place for you to put your stuff. You don't have to go through some system to find a random sublet, to stay in. They have a system for that. And it's especially important for women's leagues specifically because their salaries are much less. And so with most men's pro leagues, they don't have team housing. It's because their salaries are so much, and the league has existed for so long that they were able to build an infrastructure in men's basketball or in men's sports in general where they weren't required to do that. But it's kind of always been a pattern in women's pro leagues to have team housing. For example, so I guess the only men's like pro leagues that do have team housing is the G League and like mini camps and stuff like that for like the NFL. But for example, in the PWHL, Professional Women's Hockey League, players receive a fixed stipend, $1,500 in 2023, which rose $100 per year. NWSL, so National Women's Soccer League, and WNBA teams have both historically provided housing for players. Athletes Unlimited, which does women's softball, basketball, and volleyball, as well as Unrivaled, all have provided team housing. So in America, and overseas, it's kind of like a necessity. I think for men's overseas basketball as well, they provide housing. But in America, for some reason, it's only on the women's side, and that's definitely a result of salary and safety as well. Yeah, so I kind of wanted to look into what the housing stipends actually looked like, just as me. Like, I've lived in Michigan and the greater Chicago area and Evanston and then New York City. I was kind of curious, like, how much these WNBA teams are giving for these housing stipends. So if you choose to opt into team housing, what are you getting? So 2025, this is minus the expansion teams. This is what their housing stipends were for the season. So I'm going to put it up on the screen right now, but as you see here, we've got the Chicago Sky at $2,000. So that's one in the 2000s. LA Sparks, here we've got just over $2,000. New York Liberty, I think that's the highest one on here, $2,647. And then Washington Mystics, that makes sense, $2,200. 236. So, the most expensive cities are giving the most stipends because it's more expensive to live in those areas. So any player wishing to upgrade accommodations, so if you wanted to use this stipend but then upgrade it, you just use your salary to pay the difference in whatever that cost is. And during the off-season, players who are rehabbing an injury sustained during the prior season, so if you get hurt that season, or if you are doing team marketing agreements during the off-season, then you can continue to live in team-provided housing over the off-season. Multiple sources told ESPN that the majority of players do utilize team housing rather than choosing the stipend. But many players as well do not stay in the same city as their WNBA team in the off-season because most of them go overseas, or they go to Unrivaled or Athletes Unlimited or play in another league to make enough money to live because they are not provided enough from the WNBA alone. Another thing that's kind of interesting is if a player has a child under 13 and lives with them full-time, they automatically get a 2-bedroom apartment, and that is provided for by the team. So, that's another thing that's just building support, which if they get rid of team housing, that's no longer a thing. You're kind of on your own to find something. And a number of players, including players on the union in the WNBPA, have described housing as among a top 5 priority for this negotiation. One player quoted, "I should not be stressed about where I'm going to live when my job is to play basketball." And, I know because I live in New York City, that it's not easy and it's not always super safe to just find a sublet. You really want to make sure you know who those people are, and especially if you're a WNBA player and you have all this publicity, like you don't want to just live anywhere. Like just find a sublet on Facebook Marketplace and live somewhere in Bed-Stuy. Like I don't think that's like the best idea. I think there needs to be more kind of put in place here than just like subletting and having some random roommates. That's not ideal for a professional athlete that's one of the best in the world. So yeah, I think there's definitely got to be some structure put in place there to kind of help them out. Because women's leagues are newer than men's leagues, they've kind of built this infrastructure around housing differently. And since these men's leagues have existed for decades longer, they've evolved under the assumptions that players make enough money to be independently mobile. And they have agents that can negotiate housing assistance that are case-by-case based. And it's kind of the infrastructure of women's basketball, women's pro sports hasn't necessarily been under those assumptions that they have the individual capability to, based on their salary, solely provide as they are switching teams and going overseas and constantly kind of living life city by city. So the last kind of point I have to kind of close out this, we're at 22 minutes right now. Yeah, to kind of close out today's Tap In Tuesday is what happens next. So what happens if this next CBA negotiation, which was pushed 40 more days, so it is set to expire January 9th. CBA negotiations being pushed isn't something new. This has happened since the creation of the WNBA and since the first CBA was ratified in 1999. They've consistently kind of been pushed to January, February-ish, as the Players Union, WNBPA, has kind of pushed for new things that they are getting a lot of pushback from the WNBA on. So it's not uncommon, but we have to remember as well there are 2 expansion teams that are being added to the WNBA, the Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo. So drafts need to happen for these 2 teams. They can only happen after a new CBA is completed. For example, last year, the Golden State Valkyries expansion draft was held in early December. Where right now, December 10th, the new CBA is not even, until January 9th, so we're already past that draft date. And as well as this, all but 2 of the league's veterans will hit free agency in a time that some predict will be akin to the Wild Wild West. So again, free agency usually occurs in January, with players able to sign contracts starting February 1st. So the longer this gets pushed, the longer everything kind of gets pushed. So that's kind of what we're up against. I think me just kind of thinking about things, there's still a lot of work that the WNBA players and the union still want to be done. It doesn't sound like they are whatsoever satisfied with what is happening. And I kind of wish some of this information was publicized. I know that they send out polls to WNBA players, asking opinions on what they think about certain things. And I think it would be super interesting to know, not even specific names, but just what those numbers are. How many players in the WNBA said, I like this new CBA proposal by the WNBA, and how many said, I don't. Because I guess from a journalist perspective, looking at what public opinions have been based on, Brianna Stewart made some comments, Natasha Cloud, NECA, of course, we're listening to those voices and where they're saying, on behalf of the WNBA players, this is not exactly what we want. This is not what we're going for. So it'll be interesting to see how things continue to unfold. But until then, thank you for watching, and I will see you next Tuesday, not Wednesday, on Leia on the Line. Tap in Tuesdays. Peace out.